Welcome to the Grace to Lead podcast. I'm Belinda Gaston, your host. And listen, if you are a Christian woman who leads at work or in your own business, you are in the right place. Here you'll find practical advice and encouragement as you lead through real conversations that will challenge and inspire you. So join me on this journey to becoming better leaders God's way. Are you ready? Let the journey begin. Welcome to the Grace to Lead podcast. I am Belinda Gaston, your host, and I am so excited today to have our guest on. Listen, if you are a person who is doing a lot of things, or maybe you even feel overwhelmed and you need a moment to just pause, you feel stuck, you don't know what's going on, you are in the right place today because our guest is an expert on getting unstuck, on permission to pause. And so today I'd like to welcome our guest, Pat Layton. Let me tell you about her first before you hear her voice. Pat is a passionate and inspiring leader who during her 25 years in full-time ministry has led the founding of a variety of nonprofit ministries, including one of the nation's largest pregnancy resource centers, a Christian adoption agency, and a national abstinence education program. She's currently serving as a busy speaker, author, and life coach. She has published 6 books, y'all. Her 3-part post-abortion recovery Bible study, Surrendering the Secret, was published by Lifeway in 2009. Listen, that is an amazing book. I have it. And it was updated in 2019. She's also published several Bible study gift book series, including Born to Bloom, You Are No Ordinary Flower. And one of my favorite books of hers, y'all, is Life Unstuck, Peace with the Past, Purpose in the Present, and Passion in the Future. So listen, grab your notebooks, your digital note-taking devices. If you are in the car, make sure that you are listening while driving, but make sure that you're listening and paying attention because Pat is going to share her wisdom with us today. So why don't you virtually give us a hand clap for Pat Layton? Welcome to the show, Pat.
You are so sweet. And thank you for that precious introduction. It's such an honor to be here. It's been a journey for us to make it happen, and we are here. So I'm excited.
I'm excited too. So we are going to jump right in. I know that many of our listeners have been in a place where they may have felt overwhelmed or stuck in a place. They just couldn't, you just feel like you can't move sometimes, Pat, especially for leaders. It's easy to lead the things, but sometimes it's hard to lead ourselves, if that makes sense. And so can we share for a moment first what we mean by being stuck? What does it mean to be stuck?
Well, it comes in so many different ways, or it has in my life. I have been spiritually stuck, where I have felt like I couldn't hear from God. I had no clue if what I was doing was right, if He was leading me into something different. I have been professionally stuck, where I have been in situations in my businesses, in my ministries that have seemed to be going nowhere, that nothing I do is working, or that I'm just exhausting myself with all of my attempts. So, and then I've been stuck in my family. So there's so many places where we can get stuck, which in my description is just essentially bogged down and unable to move forward in a positive way. So, like I use the example in my book of my husband getting stuck on rocks when we were whitewater rafting. That's how it feels to me. It's like you are in a rapid of one place in your life or another, and you are trapped between rocks. Then you're jiggling and trying to figure out everything you can to get out of that and move on. So it's any feeling that women have where they're just not making progress and cannot seem to find their way out of whatever situation they're in.
I think that is a great example. And I know most recently I felt stuck, Pat, in making a decision. There was a decision I needed to make. It was pretty important. My
Yes.
husband and I were kind of praying and listening, and And we just felt like there were so many parts to making this decision that we just felt like, oh, and so we ended up doing nothing. And so I think that's why I'm excited about this. And so you talked about being stuck in many areas. And some of those reasons that you gave of how we could be stuck, I think is really important. But can we talk about why this is important for women who lead? Like, why
Mm.
does it even matter that we talk about this feeling of being stuck for women who lead?
Well, I have been in leadership in one variety or another for 30 years. As you mentioned, my earliest, well, I used to have my own insurance business. So I was in a secular business with employees and staff, and it was my own business. And then I went into full-time ministry and have been in full-time ministry for the last 30 years. I think it's inevitable for us to find places where we feel stuck. It's inevitable. It's part of our learning process. It's part of our experiencing the realities of business or ministry. So it's just so important for women to pause. That's my word. I mean, I have my own podcast that's called Push a Pause, and I just did a 5-part series on finding clarity. So you're talking about you and your husband were trying to make a decision, and that was actually born out of my own being stuck and having lack of clarity as last year ended and the new year started. So I set on a journey with God looking for actual clear steps to clarity. And so I think that it's important for us as women to evaluate on a regular basis, to take inventory of our hearts, of our relationships, of our feelings of success or failure or stuck or whatever in our business endeavors. So I just think it's important for the health of women, the overall health of women. My one of my favorite phrases is you cannot give out what you do not have. So if we do not have that piece of knowing we're headed in the right direction, if we do not have the assurance of what God's doing in our lives and the faith that he's working, how can we give it out to others? And that's our main calling, right? To share gospel, to share what God's doing in our lives and the word of our testimony. So that's why I think it's important. I think that it's inevitable to find yourself there. And it's important to figure out where you are and what you need.
I think that's a great way to sum it up. I think as leaders, a lot we focus on the needs of others and not so much ourselves, as not as much
Absolutely.
as we
As
should.
leaders and as women.
As women, yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I love your phrase of pausing. I mean, I've taken that permission. And if you haven't, for our listeners, if you haven't listened to Pat's podcast, Permission to Pause, I highly recommend it. It's great content. And it really is nice to take practical steps in pausing and thinking through and getting clarity. So before we start talking about the practicality of it, of how do we move from this place of stuck to unstuck, I would like for you to, if you're comfortable, share a time personally where you have been in a place where you felt stuck. And if you could share that and also how you overcame that place, I think that would be helpful for our listeners.
Well, in my ministry and in my business life, I mean, I've always been the leader. I founded the Pregnancy Center in Tampa and the Women's Crisis Center. So God has put me in the lead position many times where I'm responsible for other people, where I'm bringing people on or letting people go. So I think that one of the most recent and probably the biggest stuck place that I got, which eventually led to the book Life Unstuck, was a transition from running a nonprofit to stepping out on my own and speaking and writing. In that transition, I was so used to having a team and having, like I'm a firm believer in filling the positions that you're the weakest in. So I believe in finding that person where my strengths are weak and I need help, to finding those people to help. So when I stepped out of that environment, I had 40 employees. when I left that scenario into launching my book, Life Unstuck, as a single author, as someone, is trying to get into speaking and writing. And I did not have a clue what I was doing. So I lived out that book of finding my way to getting unstuck as I was writing it. I was living it out. I was writing. And I've often found as a leader, and maybe you can relate to this, Melinda, that when what I'm struggling with, the people that I'm leading are struggling with. What I see going on in my life, which is what led to my Clarity series at the beginning of this year, that I came to the end of last year feeling like I was had my hands on 5 or 6 things, and my goal for the year was less is more in 2024. My goal for this year, after 5 years of running on my own path, was to figure out to narrow it down, to have less things that I'm focused on and doing a better job with fewer things. I am not a big social media chaser. I don't care if I have 50 million followers. I'd rather have 50 followers that I'm actually serving. And that's not the norm. So it was a real struggle in my life to go into the world of independent living and, running my own ministry and being my own. I had to learn what that looked like from the expectations that were coming to me. Like if you were a speaker and a writer publishing books, the expectations of platform are the big buzzword. It's what it's all about, building your platform. And that was it was such a crisis of beliefs for me. So I think that started getting stuck, with the Getting Unstuck book, of getting unstuck from living one life of ministry, one world, and stepping into a whole new world. So I would say to your leaders, because I've been a leader for a long time, speaking to someone who is trying to decide, is this still right for me? Is this still my path? Is this what I love? Is this exciting me? Is my passion still here? And really evaluating, where am I going next and how do I get there? So using that rock example on the rapids, part of getting unstuck is really taking the time to evaluate your circumstances to figure out what's the best escape route, and not only the best, but the one that God's calling me to. So that was where, when I got this recent time, was a transition of ministry, a transition of my life work, a transition of my no team to, being like, I'd have meetings with myself, and I'm used to having meetings with teams of people that are giving me feedback or giving me thoughts. So that was a big stuck place in my life. And as I was writing the book and applying those precepts from Psalm 139, that's what the book is based on, the 24 verses of Psalm 139, and really living those out, listening to what God was saying about how he created me, what my personality was, what my gifts were. This change, right, Belinda, from when we start in our work in our ministry, our gifts change and our passions change and our desire, our focus changes. We can get burned out from one area, but take those skills that we've learned into a new area. So that was where I was stuck, was that transition of life. Then we moved here. You might remember from when we were at RestQuest, but we moved from our lifelong home of Tampa, Florida, to
Right.
Atlanta. And we moved to this beautiful little Hallmark community. But I became very stuck again because I had no friends, no community, no home church. So I found myself stuck then in a very personal way, not a professional way, but in a personal transition of friends, family, loneliness, wondering if we'd heard from God at all because everything seemed to blow up. So that would be my latest 2 examples.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Pat. And I have so many thoughts God's brought to my head to ask, I want to talk about. So first, thanks for being so transparent in sharing. But you talked about something that I think, from just my network of colleagues, people are experiencing more and more. And I don't know if it's just the state of the world, where we are spiritually, what's happening in private sector markets, but that word transition really hit me because I think if I were to think of my best girlfriends, the five best girlfriends I have, the five people closest to me that don't live in my household, I would say that at least four of them are right now going through some sort of transition, whether they are transitioning in
Mhm.
life. I have one friend that's going through a divorce right now, so that's a transition. I have another friend who
Right.
is trying to figure out what to do with her business. She's been successful at it, but she's questioning whether this is even the business she should be in. I have a
Yeah,
corporate
I get it.
person that's, I mean, it's like another friend kind of in this similar, it's just this place of transition. And I think that what we
Yes.
hear often is when you're in transition, you're supposed to, push your way through it. You do all these things to help the transition move. But what I heard you
Right.
say, Pat, is actually the opposite,
Hmm.
right? That
Hmm.
you pause. So I'd love for you to share more about that and this transition and being stuck.
Well, I think that that is so true what you're saying, because I mean, when I think of my ministry life, I transitioned in 1988, I think it was, from my insurance business to me in Tampa. I spent 25 years in that ministry. So it wasn't like I was living through a lot of transition. I was living through growth and change and learning experiences. But I was raising my children. I was, involved in the same church all those years. So that I agree that transition is kind of a new buzzword that I'm living, and I see many women living. It is definitely within the last 5 years a bigger word. So I definitely see that. I agree with it. I one of the things when you were talking about you and your husband being kind of stuck in a decision, one of the things I've learned and that I experience and hang on to is stopping in the middle of indecision, because I feel like there are two things I try to kind of follow in that. One is pause and wait on God. I am a what was identified early in my ministry years as a quick start. I am like Peter.
Mhm.
I have an idea and I'm going to go for it. I tend to ram my head against walls because I'm moving ahead of God. Um, because I feel like if this is a God idea, it's time to do it. I've so learned, especially in the last few years, that that is not true. And it could have to do a lot with our culture and the way things have changed in our world. It may have some things to do with that. But I think pausing is and just slowing down, just taking the time to listen to what God is speaking, and really hearing God is a very big weakness in our faith world, in my opinion. I mean, it's just really listening and quieting ourselves long enough to really hear what God is speaking to us. And so pausing in our transition, I think, is just so important. Taking time to evaluate, what's going on around us, and just taking all the things into account. So I think that's a big thing, is just taking time enough to just quiet ourselves to God, to listen to what he says and trust and believe that we will hear him. And then if not, getting the coaching and the input from outside. Coaching and mentoring, I think, is so big in this day and age in terms of our spiritual listening, right? But just really having the time to have somebody who sits in God's presence with you and listens with you is also a real new thing in my life and something I really see powerful.
So you've shared that stopping in the middle of a decision is a great strategy when you're in transition, when you're feeling stuck. You also talked about having a coach or a mentor to help because we are so busy sometimes it's difficult to hear from God when you're making a decision. Are there other tips
Right.
you would give, Pat?
I say go back to the last place where you heard from God. I was just thinking of that this weekend of just stepping back when you feel like you're confused or ruffled, or I think, going back and thinking back where you felt God led you. Like for an example for me would be when we moved here to Atlanta, we sold our house, we gave up our lifetime of residency and friendships and everything in Tampa, but we clearly heard God tell us to do it. We knew without question, my husband and I both, that God had directed our path. And so we never wondered. Now, we did wonder when everything exploded. Our son got transferred back to Tampa. So, the very place we left, our family was moved back to. Our daughter went through a serious heartbreak, and her situation here changed. But we did feel that God was in our move. We never doubted that, but we did wonder what the heck he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there are times when God gives us instruction. Like we just watched a series on Moses. If you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix and it's so good. And it's just was such an example of someone who was clearly following God at the best of his human ability, following God, but he ended up wandering with the people for 40 years and did not get to see the promised land. That was a good example to me of what, when we are obeying God and following God, but we're not seeing it with our eyes, or we're not experiencing what we think to experience. So I think going back and remembering what God has said, how he's directed you, and just rebuilding our faith and trust is a great thing to do in transition. Going back to the last place you heard from him, sometimes, like we said, using a coach or a mentor to help us think that out, to listen to what we're hearing. I think that's another good step, is going back to the last place so that you can hook onto that and remember that God is in this and this is what he told you to do and this is what you're doing.
Oh, that's
Does that make
great.
sense?
That is a great tip. I've never thought about that, Pat. I've never thought to going back to the place when I've been in a position where I felt stuck, going back to the place, the last place that I heard God speak. That's great advice. That's great advice. And one of those places for me, now I'm gonna segue a bit. One of
Yeah,
those
good.
places for me that I felt like I clearly heard God speak to me was when I attended your Rest Quest. And
Oh,
so for our listeners, Pat Layton hosts a series of rest quests. They're weekend kind of getaways where it's designed really for you to hear from God. So I'd like for you first to share what a rest quest is, Pat, because I remember when I went, I didn't understand what what it was.
yes, yes, yeah.
So if you can explain what a rest quest is and why you chose to host those first, then I'll ask my next
Yeah.
question.
Yes, well, RestQuest is, as I mentioned to you earlier, that I have discovered that the way I coach and lead women is what I'm going through and what I'm experiencing. There's some other women out there somewhere who are going through the same thing. So RestQuest was designed because I had a desire for a conference and someone leading a getaway that was not focused on downloading information. So, as a professional, as a businesswoman, I have been to countless conferences where I leave with a spiral notebook that's full of ideas and things to do next. And then I've gone to spiritual retreats and conferences where the same thing happens in a different way. I leave there downloaded with great teaching and great information from God's word. But it's always been a challenge to me to actually figure out how to apply those things or how they look in my life. If I go to a conference and I leave with pages of notes, but I come home with those notes, actually living that out and applying them to my life was always a stuck place for me. So Rest Quest was designed to bring a small group of women. It's called a unique boutique retreat, a small group of women together to seek God together. So there's no great teacher. As you know, I have led with Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, who is a great teacher, and many other leaders, but we do not intend at Rest Quest to do a bunch of download teaching. Our goal is to act as guides to help women find a place of quiet and pause. And as you know, it is like the one that we lead in St. Simon's Island is waterfront balcony rooms. We have an afternoon of silence. We use a process called Lectio Divina. Lectio Divina is meditating and settling in on a specific place of scripture so that you hear from God in that place of scripture. So that's the main difference in Rest Quest. Rest Quest is all about your hearing from God, not people. We are there to lead the event, to lead you into the presence of God. We're trying to set a path for women to hear from God, to get into their own hearts and have time to pause in God's presence, in the presence of some girlfriends, but it's a very private, intimate time with the Lord.
Yeah, and I thoroughly enjoyed my experience. And for our listeners, listen, I am a list girl. I want the agenda, I want a diagram, I want all the things so that I could go to every session and glean. And so this was a counterintuitive experience for me,
Mhm.
especially the afternoon of silence. I mean, you don't realize how much you
Yeah,
talk and how much you don't
yeah,
listen during the day until you're silent. And
right.
that moment of that particular day was when God laid out even the idea of this podcast to me, and
Wow.
some
Mhm.
clarity around just some things, even in my work life, that I had been thinking about. And
Mhm.
so I would say that probably the last tip to share is the importance of intentionally setting that time of rest to listen. Um,
And the
and
hard thing is a very difficult thing to do on our own. I mean, I have learned over the years about finding rest, about finding pause, and I can lay out on my hammock with my Bible or my worship music. But I think the difference in Rest Quest that I needed for myself and prayerfully you needed is just someone to lead you into that place of rest and to kind of hold you accountable in it so that you're not having to figure it out all out yourself,
Yes,
right?
absolutely, absolutely. And it reminds me of a time where I remember I asked my husband, I was like, I need to get away from the house, and I just need to have some time away. And I think he got me like a hotel room to get away for the
Uh-huh.
weekend. And
Right?
I slept, but I don't think I left with any clarity,
Yeah.
which I thought. And so I do think it's important to have those mentors and coaches helping to lead. And that's what Rest Quest provided.
Well, sometimes it is like it sounds like sometimes I think it is just physical rest. And we tell the women at Rest Quest, we use the story of Elijah in Second Kings about how he ended up under the broom tree in total exhaustion. And the angels ministered to Elijah in multiple ways. There was the physical rest that was needed. There was the emotional encouragement that was needed. There was spiritual direction. All the things that we use at Rest Quest are represented in that story.
Mhm.
So, another thing I'm doing though with the quest is that I am a firm believer in our next step and our purpose being found in our past. And I'm a believer in story. So then one of the things I'm going to be doing this fall is called a story quest, or it'll be something along that line. I haven't settled all the details, where women will come and consider their story, consider where God has led them in their life, where they have encountered Him, where they have felt stuck and got unstuck. So it'll be a quest to help women look back into their story to see what God's doing today.
Oh, that's so good. Oh, I'm excited. I can't wait. I can't wait. So I think we've talked about some practical ways of moving from how to get unstuck. And now we've talked about the power of rest. And you said, stopping in the middle of your decision making process to hear from God. Hearing from God is important. We talked about coaching and mentoring. We talked about going back to the place where you last heard God. And now we've kind of talked about the power of rest. Are
Mhm.
there any final kind of practical advice you would give to the woman right now who is feeling stuck, whether they're stuck in transition, whether they're stuck in a decision, whatever those things, maybe even spiritually, if they're feeling like I'm just not hearing from God, I feel stuck. Is there any other practical advice you would give to women who find themselves in that space?
I would say the next thing I think of is truly is cultivating a heart of gratitude. I find in my own life, and maybe some of your listeners can relate, that when I get stuck in the place I'm in life and I can't figure out the next thing, that often I have slipped into a place of discontent. And I think that one thing I've learned, or that I believe in my life, is that God will not trust me with more until I'm content with what I have. So, in other words, just really cultivating a heart of gratitude with where I am, with where God is working, how He is blessing me, all the good things that He's doing within the situation I'm in. My example, like of moving to Atlanta, being in the beginning of COVID, having no family all of a sudden. But he had given us a beautiful 3.5 acre tree covered property in a little Hallmark town, and just really trying to refocus on those things that I do have so that I feel like I get into a place where God is able to take me to the next place or take me to the next level. So for me, that's a big thing and it's something I'm working on now, working on constantly, just cultivating a heart of gratitude for where I am, what God's doing in my life, and just really focusing on that so that I can be ready for what He wants to do next. One of the things I really feel like I've discovered in my life of leadership is that it is not what I say. It is not, my message is my life. So it's how I'm living my life and what God's doing in my life, even in the tough times. Like I am watching some of my friends right now who are walking through cancer diagnosis or loss of a spouse, and their life is preaching. Their life itself is
Mhm.
ministering and preaching just by allowing people to see how they're handling the rough spots and the
Mhm.
spots of indecision, the spots where things aren't going the way we want them to. So really just cultivate that'd be, what I'd say is just cultivating that heart of gratitude and looking for where God's working, looking for what He's done. And a lot of that is like going back to where he last spoke, but looking to at what God has done, doing instead of focusing on the future. Not as worried about what's going to happen tomorrow, as or not worrying about the next right thing as much as being appreciative of what God's doing now in the here and now.
I love that. I love that. Cultivating gratitude, it really does something for you mentally. I would say for folks who are feeling even as if God's not with you, perhaps thinking back on
Right.
all the ways and all the things that have
Right.
happened in your life where God showed up is, I
Right.
think that's such a great place. That's
Well,
such a great place for us to end. I
uh,
love it. I love it.
yeah. Well, it rebuilds our faith to do that. It reminds us of who God is and how good He is, and that He's not going to leave us stuck. If we surrender our hearts to Him and we're seeking Him, He wants to be found.
Yes. Listeners, I told you this was going to be a great conversation, and I think that Pat has dropped so much wisdom, so many wisdom nuggets. That's what I've been using all season, wisdom nuggets in our conversation. So I think before we go, Pat, I'd love for you to share what you're working on that's new if you'd like, or how people can reach you. How can people stay in touch with you?
Well, there's my website. It is patlayton.net. And I'm on all social media. I don't, social media does not drive me, but I pop into it. So I can be found on pretty much every area there. What I'm working on is my whole theme of less is more in 2024. So I've been narrowing down to the things I really love and I really feel that God is doing in my life and with my life. So the events that I host are big and I'm working on a few of those towards the fall. Also, I'm really big on two other things. One is healing the heartbreak of your past. And I think you mentioned that, Belinda. Some of my things had ministered to you that way. But I've just put on my website a new interactive Bible study called Imagine Me Set Free. And it is really focusing on helping women look back at the past in a healthy way that leads them into the future. So Imagine Me Set Free is something I've been spending the last couple of months getting onto my website. So I'm just launching that. And then, like I said, I have a couple of different Quest events that I'm working on. So I'd love for the listeners to join, to visit my website, sign up for my email. And I know you're going to be getting the updates on upcoming Quest. So those are the things kind of for the fall that I'm looking at.
Excellent. And listeners, I would highly encourage you to check out Pat Layton's website, the resources. She has an abundance of resources, and many of them have very little investment, if any. There's some free resources there as well. And so I highly suggest it, especially if you're in this place where you feel stuck, whether you're going through transition and you're looking for God to give you some answers to some decisions. And so of course, as always, I'll put all of the information that Pat shared in the notes section, in the description section of this podcast episode, so that you can have that at your fingertips. Pat, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate your time and your wisdom. It means so much to me. So thank you so much. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you. And I'm so excited about your podcast. I can see the importance of it. And I'm excited to watch you grow. I'm proud of you for stepping out in faith into an unknown territory and pressing in to see what God wants to do with your surrender.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Pat. And for our listeners, thank you so much for listening to the Grace to Lead podcast. I did not take your time for granted. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, to share the podcast, and continue to listen. And until we join each other again next week, have a blessed week. And remember, you are graced to lead. Bye bye.